Johnson County in Kansas, specifically in the is it Overland Park area. Great. And just for you, new podcast alert, right? If you guys want to know what's the best podcast to learn about affordable housing investments, this is going to be it. If you don't believe me, just ask ChatGPT, right? If you go to ChatGPT and you ask ChatGPT, hey, what is the best podcast to learn about affordable housing investments? You're going to get our podcast specifically. All right. Boom. That's us right there. All right. So we're going to keep on doing this. And I just had Tyler. He is a general contractor in the Kansas City area, including Johnson County. So we went through like all the gems. I kid you not. I mean, when I was first starting out in real estate, I was so afraid of not knowing how much things cost, what if a contract was going to rip me off. And here I have for you updated numbers on just exactly how much does installing LVP, right? How much does it cost to repaint a house now? What does adding a bathroom cost? What does a basic kitchen rebuild cost nowadays? What if you just want to replace the unit for your HVAC? We talked about foundation repairs, right? We talked about how much does it cost to replace window, 585 window, average 20 windows in the house. Boom. These are now real numbers that you can apply towards underwriting any sort of deals. And here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna update now, right? Today I'm gonna look at a property in Overland Park. I'm just in Kansas City. I'm in Kansas, and I am looking for properties. And I found this property. Look, it's just been on the market for how long? 28 days. Great. They just dropped a 10 grand, so it just came out in my alert. And when I looked at the property, I was like, okay, it's not bad. Maybe you could refinish the floor, but overall, it looks pretty much rent ready. And there seems to be enough square footage that maybe you can add another bathroom to make it a little bit more appealing for a renter. So let's go ahead and understand a few things. Now, whenever I look at a property, I always try to get two data points for my rental estimates. The first one is looking up, okay, this is Johnson County. So I want to look up Johnson County 2025 payment standards. When you click on this link right here, you brings you to the Johnson County Housing Authority. This is the housing authority that's responsible for all of the vouchers, specifically housing choice vouchers, which was previously known as the Section 8 vouchers. All right. And you come down here and you see this list where it says 2025 payment standards. Click on the 2025 payment standards by zip code, and you're going to see by zip code what your rent ceiling is. This is 66204. So let's kind of find that 66204, 66204, right here. Boom. And you're going to see that the rent for a 3 bedroom is 2000. For a 4 bedroom, is 2300. So let's write these details down. 2000, 2300, 66204, 3 bed, 3 bed payment standards. And this is 204, 4 bed payment standards. Great. So now I got these two numbers here, right? Now you have to understand, usually payment standards are your rent ceiling. So if you ever don't include utilities, you always want to make sure that you get the utility allowances from your local housing authority and you back out the utilities that you're not covering. So for example, if you are a single family home, right, this is how you look at it. If you don't cover, this is for apartments. So they tell you exactly what type of unit. So if you're doing apartments, that's there. Semi-detached duplex, single family detached house, great. If you are a 3 bedroom home and you use natural gas to heat your water, so if you use natural gas to heat your house and you don't cover gas for heating, then you got to deduct 19 plus 44, that is 63. You deduct $63 from your rent ceiling. If you don't cover water, which honestly I don't really recommend it, because then I mean personally I would never cover water, because if there's ever a leak, someone isn't incentivized to tell you that there's a leak because they're not paying for water, right? So just think about it that way. So you don't cover water and sewer, you're going to deduct $184 right away. Okay. That's what it costs for utilities. So don't just automatically think that this $2,000 is what you're going to get for rent if you don't cover those utilities. All right. Now, the last thing you need to do is you need to figure out how and what is my market rent, because you got to compare with the payment standards with the market rent. And I'm going to share with you why that's important. So the first things first is let's copy this address here, 7041 Glenwood Street in Overland Park. Go to the owner section on affordablehousing.com, go to the market rent estimator, plug in the address, plug in the bedroom count, and you're going to see that the average rent here for a 3-bedroom is 1980. Great. So I'm going to use 1980 as my estimate because look, even though the payment standard is 2000, you might decide, hey, I'm not going to rent it on Section 8 because on the market, I can get a higher rent for 1980, right? Let me break down these numbers. And the reason I'm writing down these numbers is because my partners already know how I analyze deals. So if I put in these numbers, they already know where I got these stats from. Now, obviously, you want to compare like apples to apples. So make sure that you're always looking at 4-bedroom single-family homes with 4-bedroom single-family homes, 3-bedroom single-family homes, not with 3-bedroom condos or apartments. Very, very different. So, I meant to do 4. So I got the rent for 3-bedroom. Now I get the rent for 4-bedroom, 2,400. Great, 2,437. So now I have a basis, right? I have a general understanding of what this area generally rents for in this area, zip code, etc. So now I'm starting to learn a little bit more about the market. Okay. Now that I got these details in here, right, I'm going to rent it out as a market rent because I'm going to get a little bit more rent. Now, obviously, there's some perks, right, for renting out Section 8 because what's the best way to say it? There's guaranteed rent, you get paid on time every single month, and even during COVID, you got paid rent. So that's a decision that you have to make. But ultimately, what you're going to do is you got to find out what is the rent that you can charge. Rent reasonableness test, Johnson County Housing Authority. We kind of search this up. So rent reasonableness. A lot of people sometimes will teach you, like, hey, if you look up the HUD FMR or whatever, that's the rent you're going to get. But they always forget that your rent that you charge to someone has to be reasonable. And the rent reasonableness test essentially says that, hey, you cannot charge more rent to someone just because they are a voucher holder, because for obvious reasons. But you can, if you want the actual language, just look up for this one. Usually your housing authority will have the language, but just look up Johnson County rent reasonableness, and you can see it right in here how it compares the proposed rent for a housing choice voucher unit to the rent for similar non-subsidized units in the jurisdiction, and that's how you determine rent reasonableness. Okay, just so people understand that that is what you need to understand and incorporate into how you estimate rents for your own properties. Okay, great. So now that we talked about that, I'm going to use 1980 for this property, 1980. Let me start plugging in some numbers. And for those of you that want to follow along, right, you guys want to copy a spreadsheet, just go to affordablehousing.io, go to the Get Deal Analysis tool. That's the fastest way for you to copy a spreadsheet, right? Now, on this spreadsheet, I'm going to start plugging in some details here. Now, this is 7041 Glenwood Street. It's listed for $264,950. All right, from the rehab, let's go ahead and kind of zero that out. I'll just make adjustments on a prior thing. So if I go to the rehab calculator, well, let me update my numbers with what we're seeing for this market specifically. So today, right, every market is going to be a little different. So I know that, hey, windows right now, they're costing $585. So I'm going to update that in I-32, right? Now I know where I updated on my thing because this is now specific for Kansas City market. All right. Next up, what else did I learn from my interview with Tyler? LVP is $455 a foot now. Great. Before I was in Scottsdale, I was charging $8 a square foot. So here, let me just change it to $5. Staying conservative here. I'll use $5. For paint in Scottsdale, it was $3. That was like a year ago. So now it's $355. So I'm gonna do $375. Just add a little bit of contingency here. right? If I need to repaint the home, that's how much I want to have in place, okay? Now, adding a bathroom, $8,000. I think that's what I had in here still. I think it's still like roughly $8,000. Bathroom, premium adding a bathroom. Oh, I had 7,500, so now I'm gonna change it to $8,000. Boom. Renovation, 6,500 is what he told me about for a renovation. Adding a bathroom, boom. All right, basic kitchen rebuild, 9 to 12 grand. So you see right here for my kitchen, if I had to redo a whole property, I'm gonna do my low end kitchen at $9,000, a higher end kitchen at 12,500. Great, boom, basic kitchen. So HVAC system, 6,500, 8,000 for the repair now. So if I have our HVAC system and I need to replace it, so I got about 6,500, 8,000 for a 1,500 square feet home. Hot air only, 6,500. So I'm just gonna assume that this is gonna be 6,500. Boom. I'm updated because I'm gonna get the same unit for both heat and AC. HVAC unit, great. For all systems, foundation issues, 12 to 16 grand. Foundation, boom. Repair existing foundation. I'm just gonna do 12 grand minimum, to say the least. All right. Bowling wall support, piers. If I'm doing piers, he's doing $1,500 per pier now. So I'm updating that. I'm updating these repairs. Boom. Whole house electrical upgrade, 60 grand, 6 to 8 grand. Electrical, where's my electrical section? 6 to 8 grand. Rewire entire house thing. So this is actually a little bit cheaper than what I was doing in Scottsdale. So I'm lower that to 8 grand. So now I got all these items updated for my future. If I'm ever analyzing another deal in Kansas City, I now know what I need to do to get my property up to code, right? So here we are, right? Let's go ahead and analyze the rest of this deal. So for this property, right, this is, if I look at the pictures on this property, it looks relatively like it's in good shape. I mean, I'm assuming I need to repaint maybe half the house. I might have to refinish the home. Let's see what the description says. This needs a little TLC. Beautiful hardwood floor, so I don't need to do anything there. All 3 bedrooms with hardwood floors, generous closet space. Hall bathrooms finished with a clash tile. A bonus family room off the kitchen provides extra living space, convenient basement access. So the full basement, there is a full basement. Boom. So maybe I can turn this into a 4-bedroom, right? If there's an egress. So I got to look into this property to see whether or not it's worth a while for me to turn it into a 4-bedroom later down the road. But for now, I'm just going to assume that I will need to repaint half the house, 600 square feet. I'm assuming I don't need to do any flooring work because there's already LVP there. How do the cabinets look? How do the kitchen cabinets look? Honestly, that looks fine. I don't need to do anything for the kitchen, so I don't need to repaint it and zero that out. For my bathroom, I don't think I need to do anything, but I do want to replace the existing toilet with high pressure flush toilet so that I don't get any clogged toilet calls. 4, I'm going to add an additional bathroom. I think a 2 toilets always runs better than 1 toilet. All right, I don't really have that much rehab for this property. I'm gonna set aside $1,500 for the roof because in every single home that I've always bought, I always have had some roof work done. So I'm gonna do it for this situation as well. All right. Let's go ahead and do this. Next up, what we're gonna do is we're gonna plug in the rents of 1980. We got $15,900 for rehab for this property, just so we can have a little bit of buffer room. Now, for my taxes, let me get that number right from my Redfin calculator, which is 223. My home insurance, 172, equals 172 on a multiplied by 1.2, because I'm assuming that this 172 number of insurance estimate from the payment calculator is for a primary residence property. So for me, I am multiplying by 1.2 to add a 20% premium because I understand that more likely than not, insurance companies view this asset as an investment property as a riskier asset. So they're going to charge more money. All right. So the next step in B32, I have 10% of my rents set aside for maintenance every single month. This is money that does not belong to me. I set aside this money because I want to make sure, I really want to make sure that I never underestimate my expenses and overestimate my profitability. Because at some point you're going to be replacing all of these items, the roof, the HVAC, they're going to break down eventually. So if you don't set aside money right now, you might be thinking you're making all this money, and in 10 years, you have like a $15,000 roof repair, and you would have been just out of luck and thinking you made all this money, and then it all evaporates. So don't underwrite your property without maintenance. I've seen other people that are out there that are analyzing deals, or they're telling their folks, right? I see it in the Instagram stories where they tell people, when people ask, hey, what are you using for maintenance? And they say, none. I'm buying turnkey properties. That is so fiscally irresponsible. Please don't ever listen to people that teaches you that there's no maintenance, all right? Number one red flag. Now, property management, they're roughly around 10% for your property management expenses. And then for vacancy, I got 5%, right? Someone always moves out of your home, so always set aside some money. Now, for property management, you can self-manage, but just understand that if you don't underwrite with property management expenses in there currently, then chances are you are buying yourself a job. And most people get into real estate to be as passive as possible, although you can't be completely hands off, to be as passive as possible. So if you don't underwrite this with property management, then you will never be able to get out of that situation. All right. I just want to make sure people understood that concept. So let's go next. In F19, I got 25% down. So my down payment is going to equals to B4, which is my asking price, times my down payment percentage of 25%. So for this property, I would be putting down $66,237. All right. Right now, I believe last time I heard I think it was 7% actually. Last time I heard, if you want to get a 25% debt DSCR, debt service coverage ratio loan, it's about right around 7%. So let me use 7% just to underwrite for today. For my closing costs, I got about 3.5% based on the price of this property. Let me do that. 3. So that equals 9,273. My renovations, I have 15,900. So let's do this math. If I rent this property out as a 3-bedroom and I get 1980 for this property, right? I will be cash flowing negative after all my expenses, right? Negative 266.44, right? My cash on cash return on this, negative 3.5%. Assuming a purchase price of 260, I'm just gonna round 265,000 with a $15,900 rehab, 25% down, 7% interest rate. All right, let's do some scenarios because I think this is the exercise I really want you to understand. Let's say your goal is to get a 8% cash on cash return, right? It might be low because you believe in this market and there's more appreciation, right? But if that's the case, what do you need to buy this property at, assuming everything else stays constant, to get a 8% return? Let's try 150 grand. Boom. Almost there. Let's try 135. Boom. Now I'm 8%. 138. Boom. That works. So in order for me to achieve an 8% cash on cash return, I would have to buy this property that was listed for $265,000, assuming I still have $15,900 rehab, right? Boom. 3-bed, 1980. Because now this way I can cash with $367 a month. Now, am I saying you don't get this house with 138? No, but at least now you know what your buy box is, if that is your criteria for determining what is a deal for you specifically. All right. This is not investment advice. I'm just showing you how to adjust the different levers and see what you can pull on to figure out what's a deal for you. Because you might send your contractor in there, and then all of a sudden, like, dude, this house is fine. Like, you're way overestimating your rehab. So let's say I go to B6, and now I divide it by 2, because now my rehab is only 8 grand. See what happened to my cash return? It jumped from 8 to 9. So now I'm gonna say, hey, maybe I was willing to pay 150 grand for this. Oh yeah, that's too much. 148. Too much. 145. Boom, 145. So if my rehab was half, I would be willing to pay an extra $7,000 for this property, assuming my rehab was only 8 grand, just rounding here. Right? Assuming everything else stays constant, at 25% down, 7% interest rate, 3-bedroom, 1980. All right. Now, 332, and this is 8% return, 8.1, 8.1. Boom. Okay, good enough. Now, let's do a couple more scenarios. Let's say your interest rate dropped by half a point. And this can really happen overnight, okay? Let's say it's now 6.5%. If you're at 6.5%, right? This is something you got to understand. If you look up 30-year mortgage interest rates versus 10-year yield, a lot of people don't understand that the 30-year mortgage interest rate is affected by 2 factors. The first factor is the interest rate on the 10-year treasury yield. And the second factor is the spread between the 10-year yield and the 30-year mortgage interest rates. Now, historically, that spread was about 2.5%, actually 1.5% to 2%. But it's gone as high as like 3%. That's when we saw interest rates in the 8s. And that's when like the whole housing market completely stopped. But nowadays, you see the spread narrowing. Nowadays, you see news of expected future rates, right? So don't pay attention to what the Federal Reserve is talking about interest rates. Pay attention to what's happening in the bond market. Follow the 10-year yield and watch what's happening to it, because the bond market is always faster than the interest rate. So you can kind of see right here, yeah, roughly around 2.5. So it's probably got another half a point to go. So there's less volatility, less risk, more predictability with the trade war, et cetera, et cetera. Well, now all of a sudden, your interest rates go down. And this can happen overnight. And when this drops half a point overnight, now all of a sudden, let's see what I can pay for this property. I can go from 145 to 151 and still achieve the same return. So, assuming everything else stays constant from the last year, $8,000 rehab, 6.5% interest rate, that half point drop gave me $6,000 more in buying power to achieve the same target return. All right. 340. Now, let me do one more scenario for you. All right, just think completely outside of the box. Let's kind of make it back into normal renovations. Let's say it'll cost me to add an additional bedroom for 15 grand. Yep, this one already added a new bathroom. So now I want to see adding a bedroom. Where's my adding bedroom? Add an extra bedroom. Oh, I have 20 grand. Let's do it for 15 grand. Let's assume that it cost me 15 grand to finish the basement, etc. Add an egress, turn to a legal 4th bedroom. Well, now I can rent it out on the market for $24,37, and my rehab jumped to $34,000 roughly. But you see what happened to my numbers? Because I'm getting actually almost $400 in extra rent. Now what am I willing to pay for the property? 178. Right? So even though now it's a 4-bedroom, $24,37, I can cash flow now $555 a month for an 8% return. But now I'm willing to pay $178,000, even though my rehab is now $34,000, just rounding here. 25% down, 6.5% interest rate. Okay. Does this make sense for everybody? Because this is how you go through your scenario analysis. This is how you figure out, hey, what can I do with my property? Right? If I keep it as a 3-bedroom, I'm willing to pay 151 for it. But if I'm willing to turn into a 4-bedroom, do the work, do the exercise because I have a good contractor, but know that my cash out of pocket is a lot higher, right, for my renovations. Well, now I'm willing to pay a little bit more for the property. And now you get a little bit closer to what's listed at. Now, will they take the property? Probably not. But hey, you might think like, hey, this area grows by like 5% every single year. So they might think like, well, what if I'm willing to just settle for like a 4% return, right? Plus appreciation. Well, now all of a sudden you might say, well, I'm willing to pay 220. Boom. So at 4.4%, that's the same yield as what a 10-year yield is, but you're assuming there's underlying appreciation. So boom, you might say like, hey, I'm willing to pay 220. Right? It's listed for 265. I'm willing to pay 220. I make just as much on my cash flow as I invest in treasury, but I know I'll get underlying appreciation. Now that's very speculative. All right. It's very risky, but it's up to you to decide how you want to approach it. All right. I hope this is helpful, everybody. This is why I want to go through the level of details, to show you exactly how I would underwrite a deal for a single family Section 8 rental, long term rental using a real live data. Because my goal is this, I hope you